They say the mountains remember what the people forget. And in the hollers of southern Appalachia, deep where the road turns to mud and the sun barely touches the forest floor, there's a house that stands like a wound that never healed. Locals whisper its story only after a few drinks, always checking first to make sure no one else is listening. Because this story isn't about ghosts. It's about blood. And what happens when the line between mother, daughter, and wife begins to blur until nobody can tell who belongs to whom anymore. Our story begins in McDowell County, West Virginia, sometime around the 1940s. A place where poverty clings to the bones, where coal dust blackened the lungs and the soul alike. Families lived by their own laws back then, mountain laws, unwritten and enforced by silence. Outsiders didn't come here, and if they did, they didn't stay long. The people who were born in these hills often died in them too. Sometimes generations never moved more than a few hundred yards from the place they were born. The Mattingly family was one of those names everyone knew, but no one spoke aloud. They lived up on Crow Ridge, a stretch of land so isolated even the mailman refused to go past the second bridge. The patriarch, Elias Mattingly, was a coal miner turned recluse after an accident in the mines left him half-blind and full of bitterness. His wife, Clara, was known to be quiet, church-going, a woman who carried sorrow like it was her only possession. Together, they had one daughter, Anna. Anna grew up like many mountain girls did, barefoot, wild-haired, and tough enough to wade through creeks in winter. But people noticed something different about her even as a child. They said her eyes didn't just look at you, they seemed to see through you. The kind of eyes that make you lower your head without knowing why. When she was 12, the preacher's wife tried to take her under her wing, said the girl needed guidance. After one visit, the preacher's wife never went back. She said Anna made her uncomfortable. She wouldn't say why. By the time Anna turned 16, her father's health had worsened. The mines had taken what little light was left in him. He spent his days in the darkened parlor, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes and staring at nothing. And it was around this time that people stopped seeing Clara in town. No one thought much of it at first. In Appalachia, women disappearing wasn't always unusual, sometimes they went to kin, sometimes they just vanished into the hills. But whispers began when Clara's name stopped being mentioned altogether. Then came the spring thaw. The river flooded, and a neighbor's hound brought back something washed down from Crow Ridge, a woman's shoe, cracked and half-rotted. Inside it were the remains of a foot. Sheriff's men hiked up to the Mattingly house, but Elias told them his wife had gone to stay with her sister in Kentucky. The sheriff nodded. There was no reason to doubt him. Back then, people didn't ask many questions. Especially not about the Mattinglys. But the sister in Kentucky? She'd been dead for 7 years. From then on, the ridge grew quieter. Anna, now a woman grown, was seen less and less. Elias stopped coming into town entirely. When the mailman finally refused to deliver, saying the family never answered the door, the county marked them non-responsive. And the Mattingly name faded into local legend. That is, until 1952, when something far stranger emerged. A man named Lester Cray came through McDowell County looking for work. He was a drifter, a man of no fixed address, sleeping in barns and taking whatever labor he could find. One night, while drinking at a roadside tavern, he told the barkeep he'd found a golden-haired angel up on Crow Ridge who'd offered him food and a bed. When the barkeep told him there hadn't been anyone living up there in years, Lester just laughed. "She's there," he said. "Lives with her mama. Sweetest 2 women you ever saw." 2 women. A few weeks later, he returned to the tavern again, different this time. Pale, shaking. He said he'd gone back to the ridge, and that he'd met the husband. "Mean old bastard," he said. "Didn't like me talking to the girl." He muttered something about the old man's eyes, said they were milky, clouded, but somehow still watching everything. Then, just before he left, Lester said something no one could make sense of at the time. He said, they both called him husband. The next morning, Lester was gone. His belongings were found near the riverbank, but no body was ever recovered. Years passed, and the Mattingly homestead fell deeper into ruin. Hunters reported seeing figures moving behind the curtains at night, but no one dared get close. The sheriff who'd once visited the house retired and refused to speak about it. Some said he'd been threatened. Others said he'd been cursed. But by the 1970s, the Mattingly property was officially condemned. The roof had caved in, the windows shattered. The forest had begun to reclaim what it was owed. And that might have been the end of it, just another mountain mystery buried under time, if not for a discovery made decades later. In 1994, a team of archaeologists from a nearby college was surveying the area for historical mining artifacts. When they reached Crow Ridge, they found the remains of the Mattingly house. Beneath the floorboards, they uncovered something that made two of them quit on the spot. It wasn't just bones they found, it was family. 3 skeletons, all buried within the same 6-foot patch. A male, 2 females. DNA testing wasn't immediate in those days, but when the results came back years later, they confirmed the impossible. The 2 women were related, mother and daughter. Both were genetically tied to the man buried with them. But here's the part that chilled the blood of every researcher who touched the case. The younger woman wasn't just the daughter of the older woman. She was also the offspring of the man. And, she was carrying a child when she died. There was no record of any burial, no cemetery markers, no indication of ceremony. Just a hole in the dirt floor, hastily covered, like someone trying to hide shame from God himself. Locals began retelling the story in fragments. Some said Elias had lost his mind after the mine accident, that he'd turned to his own daughter for comfort. Others claimed it was Anna who seduced him, that something dark had rooted in her long before she was old enough to understand what it was. But no one could explain the third body, the child that had never been born. Some nights, when fog covers the ridge and the wind comes down from the mountains low and hollow, the old-timers say you can still hear 3 voices in the trees, one whispering, one weeping, and one too faint to understand. They say the Mattingly bloodline ended there, that day the house finally caved in. But if you ask around McDowell long enough, you'll hear a different story. A story that says one of them survived. That a child was born before the rest perished, and that this child was taken in by a family far away, given a new name, and told never to speak of where she came from. Because some secrets in these mountains don't die. They just change their faces. And that's where the real horror begins. The records say the Mattingly bloodline ended on Crow Ridge. But the mountains, they tell a different story. In 1997, a woman named Ruth Avery moved into a small trailer park just outside Welch, West Virginia. She was quiet, mid-40s, worked nights at a textile plant, and kept to herself. People said there was something off about her, not dangerous, just wrong in a way you couldn't name. Her face looked ordinary until you noticed her eyes. That strange gray color. Almost like milk swirling in water. Folks joked she must have been part Mattingly. She never laughed when they said it. Years later, after she passed, her landlord went through her belongings. Inside a locked trunk, he found an envelope marked only with one word, Ridge. Inside were newspaper clippings about the 1994 dig, a faded family photo from the 1930s, and a scrap of paper that simply read, he had 2 wives, and one was his sin. DNA testing in the early 2000s would later confirm that Ruth Avery wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Ruth Mattingly, the granddaughter of Anna Mattingly, born before the fire that destroyed the house on Crow Ridge. She had been adopted by a family in Bluefield after her mother died. The records had been sealed, the truth erased. But blood, no matter how deeply you bury it, has a way of surfacing. Ruth's co-workers described her as withdrawn, but she spoke often about family curses and mountain deaths. Once, a friend claimed she'd woken to find Ruth standing over her bed in the middle of the night, whispering, "He still calls me wife." The friend laughed it off later, said Ruth had been sleepwalking. But when she told that story, she didn't smile. The tragedy of the Mattingleys wasn't just what happened on that ridge, it was what kept happening, generation after generation. A cycle of silence, shame, and secrecy that devoured itself from the inside out. In towns like McDowell, family was supposed to be sacred. Blood was supposed to bind. But what happens when that blood turns poisonous? When the line that separates love from ownership dissolves into nothing but need and madness? Ruth's journals were later donated to a local historical society. Most of them are incoherent, half prayers, half confessions. But in one entry, written only weeks before she died, she describes a recurring dream. "I'm standing in the old house again. The floorboards breathe under my feet. Mama's voice is coming from under the ground, and she's asking me to open the door. But the door doesn't lead outside, it leads down. Down to where the roots are. I can hear them talking. They remember everything." Investigators found no evidence of foul play in her death. But the coroner's report noted that her fingernails were filled with soil, as if she'd been digging before she died. After her burial, the local paper ran a small piece titled, "Crow Ridge Bloodline Finally Ends." But people who live near that part of the mountain don't believe it. Some say Ruth wasn't the last. That she had a son before she came to Welch, a boy she left behind when she got sick in the head. The adoption records were sealed, just like her mother's before her. And maybe that's the real curse, not the sin of the father, but the silence that follows it. The way families in these hills bury their pain so deep it starts to sprout new generations of it. You see, in Appalachia, family isn't just blood. It's inheritance. It's obligation. It's the stories you inherit whether you want them or not. And sometimes those stories are darker than the coal seams running beneath the ground. There's a reason the locals still avoid Crow Ridge. They say when the wind hits just right, you can hear a woman's voice humming a lullaby that no one's sung in 100 years. They say if you listen too long, you'll start to remember things that never happened to you, faces you've never seen, names you never learned, but somehow already know. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have buried the truth, or yourself? Some historians argue the Mattingly case was exaggerated, a result of folklore twisting tragedy into myth. But the documents exist. The bones are real. The photographs too faded to forge. And even now, the local archives keep one box sealed under lock and key, its contents restricted by order of the state. Inside that box, they say, is a journal written by Elias Mattingly himself. Pages smeared with coal dust and blood, words half burned away. But one entry remains almost intact. It reads, "She said I was born of my mother's grief, and my daughter was born of mine. The ridge won't let us go. The ridge keeps what it loves." Some say Elias was mad by the time he wrote it. But others think he understood something no one else could, that the land itself had turned against them. That isolation wasn't the cause of the sickness, but the symptom. The mountain had been feeding on them, the way it feeds on everything that stays too long. Maybe that's the truest horror of Appalachia. Not monsters or ghosts or cursed families, but the quiet hunger of the earth itself. The way it keeps the dead close, whispering their names until someone answers. And every few decades, someone always does. By the time the 21st century rolled in, Crow Ridge had become a place of pilgrimage for the curious and the damned. Amateur ghost hunters, history students, out-of-towners looking for something to make them feel alive. They'd drive up in the fall, when the leaves turned to fire and the fog hung low enough to touch. They'd bring cameras and flashlights, whisper the Mattingly name like a dare. Most came back with nothing but scratches on their arms and bad dreams. But a few brought something else. One college group from Morgantown claimed their audio recorder captured a voice repeating a single word, ours. Another swore the temperature dropped 30 degrees near the old foundation. Their photos, grainy and overexposed, showed 3 silhouettes. One tall, one smaller, and one not quite formed. But the most disturbing discovery came in 2018, when a freelance journalist named Caleb Rhodes went looking for the truth. He was making a documentary about Appalachian folklore and wanted to separate myth from fact. The locals warned him not to go up there alone. He laughed. He was a rational man. A skeptic. He thought the real story was poverty, isolation, and human despair. The rest, he said, was just superstition. The last footage on his camera tells a different story. It's shaky, filmed at dusk. He's standing before the ruins, what little is left of the Mattingly home. The stone chimney still rises like a spine, broken but unyielding. You can hear his breath, his voice calm but strained. He's narrating for the camera, describing the site, the soil, the silence. Then, without warning, he stops speaking. His head turns. The microphone picks up something faint. A whisper. It's impossible to make out the words, but you can hear the tone, pleading, intimate, like someone talking to a loved one in the dark. Caleb's flashlight flickers once, then steadies. His voice, now lower, says, "Who's there?" A pause. Then a second whisper. Closer this time. The video ends abruptly. His car was found 2 days later at the base of the ridge. The camera was recovered nearby, but Caleb was never seen again. The sheriff's report said he must have fallen into one of the old mine shafts. Happens all the time in those hills. But those who watched the footage noticed something strange in the final frame, a shape in the doorway of the ruin. Too small to be a man. Too tall to be a child. And the light from Caleb's camera caught just enough to show its eyes. Gray. Clouded. Like milk swirling in water. After his disappearance, the state fenced off Crow Ridge for safety concerns. The sign reads environmental hazard, no trespassing. But every few years, the fence is cut, the warning ignored. People still go. People still vanish. And every time it happens, the locals just shake their heads. The mountain's still hungry, they say. It's just feeding what's left of the family. Maybe that's the part outsiders never understand. Appalachia isn't just a place. It's a memory that refuses to die. Every hollow, every ridge, every creek still carries the stories of those who tried to outlive their own blood. The Mattinglys were just one of many. Their name became a curse, a symbol of what happens when love festers into ownership, when grief becomes worship, and when the land decides to keep what's buried within it. Some believe the ridge took them out of mercy. That it swallowed them before they could do worse. Others think it's still punishing them, over and over again, through every generation that dares to forget. But the truth? The truth is quieter than that. It's not in the screams or the ghosts or the missing men. It's in the silence that follows. The way the hills hold their breath when the wind stops. The way the ground seems to hum, low and deep, like something remembering your name. One local pastor put it best, years ago, when someone asked if he believed in the curse. He said, "Son, this isn't about belief. This is about inheritance. And some inheritances you don't spend, you survive." If you ever find yourself driving through southern West Virginia, and you see an old dirt road branching off into the fog, marked only by a rotted fence post and a single nail where a sign used to hang, "Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't listen if you hear singing. And if you see a house that shouldn't be there, don't go inside." Because the mountains remember. They remember the Mattinglys. They remember what they did. And if you're not careful, they might remember you too.